podcasting will be a thrill. Grandpa and chill, grandson and friends. Grandpa and chill in full effect. We talk about it all, yeah, put it all on the set with that pet craze too. We chillin' with Rosie, come through, stay tuned, yeah, listen closely. Cause this the millennials and the silent generation coming together, discussion in rotation. This is Grandpa and Chill.
Who's gonna swear first?
No, you're good. You're good.
Grandpa,
You're good.
say fuck.
Uh-oh.
I thought you stopped using those words, Brandon.
Oh, I'm sorry. You taught them to me, Grandpa. Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon Fox. You're here for another episode of Grandpa and Chill. I'm here with my amazing co-host, as always, Phines, amazing producer, Sierra, and my grandfather. Today we have a very special guest, Margo Arrowsmith. That's an amazing name.
Isn't it? I love that one.
Really? Would you mind telling the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am, I've been working as a psychotherapist for 40 years, and at 75, I'm still working full time and intend to do so for a long time to come. Recently, these days, I've been working with a lot of us older folks. And what's been exciting about it is that, you know, I'm getting people coming in who are in their 70s and 80s and saying, you know, I want to work on my stuff. The media or the people who kind of want to pigeonhole old people say, oh, they're just all depressed, or they're working on this, or they're getting ready to end their lives. And I'm finding it just not that way. You know, people are settling problems from early on in life, and they're wanting to know what they can do next. And it's very exciting. So I work with a lot of people who are kind of working on what we call anti-ageism, which is basically prejudice against older people and younger people. So I was so excited when I found out that there's this podcast that is intergenerational and working together. So I'm real anxious to hear what you guys do.
Yeah, I mean, no, go, Grandpa.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I would just say, happy that you're on. No, what were you going to say, Grandpa?
What do you think of the controversy about Biden?
I think that I think it's a political ploy, frankly. You know, he's done a great job. He certainly did a much better job than the guy before him. He speaks better than the guy before him, and he's not that much older. So I think it's something because they can't actually attack him on what he's done. So they keep calling him senile or all these crazy things, which we all know he's not. You know, if somebody can. Because what he has to do with his stutter, what he has to do is think like 2 sentences ahead, so that if he sees himself starting to say a word he has a hard time talking, he has to change it. I mean, you can't have dementia symptoms and be able to do that. So I also, by the way, speaking of this controversy, I mean, my controversial stance is that probably the most overdiagnosed thing in the country is dementia. I mean, anybody who has gray hair or, was born a certain year, things that they've been doing their whole life. I had a woman come into my office a little while ago. She's in her 80s, and she sat down and very, announced to me as if, some pronouncement. She says, well, I have dementia, and that's what we have to work on. So I said, oh, you have dementia. Prove it to me, which of course nobody else says. They're not going to say that. So the example she gave was she was trying to cook and couldn't find the marinating pan. And that, since she couldn't find it, she couldn't remember where it was, that meant she had dementia. So in talking with her, I find out, well, you know what? It turns out that her entire life, she had this habit of not putting things back where they belong. So her entire life, she couldn't find things. But now that she's in her 80s, it must be dementia. And that's so much what happens. So, matter of fact, I have a channel on YouTube Age Out Loud, it's called. And one of the playlists is Just Because You're Old Doesn't Mean It's Dementia. And I have 12 videos where I talk about other things that dementia could be. And so I say to people, if your doctor says this to you, you say to your doctor, if I were 45, what else would you be looking for? So, and look for that in me. So it was a good question to ask me, Barton, because I'm pretty hot on the subject. So there you go.
Huh?
I like that. You have a good sense of humor.
Just kidding.
I knew you were. I knew you were. So how did you guys get this together, this intergenerational thing?
Well, from my point of view, Brandon did the whole set.
No, Grandpa started it actually. So the crazy thing is in 2020, I feel like he called me. I was driving in my car, and he's like, "I just heard of this great new thing called the podcast. I kind of want to do one."
I love it.
Yeah. And they had been out for
Well, I
like
do
8
have
years.
dementia because I don't remember that conversation.
I don't remember much things, Grandpa. Yeah, and then it just sort of naturally progressed from there. I feel like we're still, just finding our flow, and the show's evolved and keeps evolving a lot. So, yeah, but it's really cool. It's been like 2 years or more.
Now, I did have a thing the other night, which I've never had this happen, but I literally, for a moment, forgot my wife's name.
Uh-huh.
I started saying, and it just slipped, and I couldn't remember, and then it came back. But I had some sort of a brain stopped working for a second. Yeah,
I mean, it happens. One of the problems is that when that happens to us, and it happens to people their whole lives, and it may happen when we're older. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't. But what the problem is when it happens when you're older, it's like, oh my God, and then it gets scary, and you think, oh my God, that must be dementia. Then you get anxious, and that anxiety increases the amount of times that it happens. But to get back about your show, when I was 6 months old, my parents bought their first of 3 small town newspapers in Iowa, and when Dad was 91, I sat him down. This was with, I don't know if you guys remember that little flip camera. You guys might be too young for that. But, and it was back in the days when YouTube would only accept videos 4 minutes and under. So, but anyway, I decided,
Yes.
Do you remember that? I decided
Yes, I used to want a flip camera so bad when I was in school.
Oh, they were
I know exactly what you're
wonderful.
talking about.
They
were
the
so
best
cute and
cameras.
perfect size.
And the great sound. But anyway, so I said, Dad, I'm going to make these videos and you're going to talk about it. And he's like, oh God, I have nothing to say. And so at first, he was great from the first video on, but I got to the point where, because it could only be 4 minutes, I'd have to say, Dad, stop. We can make another one. Because once he started talking, so I got this crazy idea, and I can't get anybody to go along with it, that, people talk about, well, we can't get our grandchildren and our parents together. I said, well, you know what? Your grandkids love technology. Your parents have a lot of stories to tell. How about you get the grandkids to record the grandparents, and that'll bring them together. And people looked at me like I was crazy, but I mean, clearly you're showing that it's a great idea. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's nice.
Huh?
I said thank you. That's nice to know.
Yeah. I mean,
we're working together.
Yeah, I'm thrilled.
Yeah, it's really cool. I just to a previous point that you had made, Margo, talking about older people and therapy. I feel like our generation is much more aware of it than maybe 60 years ago. Is that true?
Well, it's hard to say because matter of fact, I see you're in Tom's River. I lived in Montclair for like 25 years. I lived in northern Jersey. And so we went into the city a lot, and it was a little more almost like expected. I was going to say accepted, but it's actually expected. People were more aware of it, certainly in New York and probably in North Jersey. So yeah, I think it depends on what part of the country you're in, how aware people are. But New York City was the hot spot for, and still probably is, for therapy and training. It was a really easy place to get postgraduate training. So, I was grateful to be there for that. Yeah.
What were you saying about Tom's River?
Well, I saw your phone, and when I called Brandon earlier, and it came up on my recent calls as Tom's River. You're not in Tom's River?
No longer, but I grew up in Tom's River. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's okay. So that's why.
And
Yeah.
the county area code. Yeah. And I used to live down the street from Phines. Phines is in Queens and all that. Are you?
So you were in the city then? Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Did you grew up in the city in Queens? You said?
Yeah. No, I grew up in Jersey, but I lived in Queens.
Okay.
Phines, is your video back? I know that it kept kicking you out of the room or whatever. But
yeah. How do I sound audio though?
Excellent.
Really? Yeah.
Honestly. Because before you were too loud and more muffled. Now it's clear, crisp and clear.
Good.
And
Yeah, it's much better.
You hear us okay?
You guys aren't lying to me. You're not just saying that. You're just not blowing smoke up.
I mean, I think you sound like shit, but
I do lie, but not in this.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
I haven't heard you say anything, so I'd like to hear about you.
I was so subconscious. I was like, oh no, I'm gonna sound like ass. I was just like, I don't wanna talk, so let me not ruin it with my mic. No, I just been taking notes about you. I think that you have some. I guess I should talk about myself. My name is Phines. I live in Astoria right now. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Midwest. Yeah, so yeah, that's a little bit about me, I guess. But there's some stuff that you said that really I liked a lot, which is like a couple like the acts of kindness. I think like when you let your like grandkids record your grandparents, I think that is not only like just a good idea, but it's just like it just seems like it would make everyone it just good vibes. But the kids would feel very like cool and innovative and and important, and I think that like you were saying about your father, after a while they're like, oh, I keep talking for days. So thanks for having the camera on me. I've been trying to talk. I think that's awesome to get people to do that, and really the whole focus on age and asking questions about like that's kind of mind blowing in the sense of like you're right. Once you're at this certain age, it's like this stereotype of I must need a knee replacement, and it couldn't just be like maybe I need to stretch today, which I would have thought about that 30 years ago, but now you act like you can't stretch anymore.
Well, exactly. So, and I'm glad you brought that up, because somebody was telling me yesterday, it's like, if you need a knee replacement or your knee hurts, they're like, oh, it's because I'm old. Well, then then how come if it's just because you're old, why doesn't your other knee hurt? They're both the same age, but we just, make these assumptions. And, and there's, I think, senior housing and the senior industry is a big industry. There's a lot of money at stake, and what they need to do in order to make all that money is to get old people to do what they want them to do. For instance, go into an assisted living, don't stay home, do this, do that. And when they can't convince the older people to do it, what they do is they start marketing to their children who are adults, terrifying them, saying, oh, if you don't make your parents go this place, if you don't have the talk with them, and then they teach you how to manipulate your parents into having this talk by being very manipulative and dishonest with them. And it's causing so much of a rift between the generations, and we need to get back together with each other and not get pushed around by marketers so much.
I really feel that, because I think I've been listening to like just conversations in general with people my age, and the point of seeing ageism, like I see racism because I'm black or whatever, and I see gender because I'm I'm a male or whatever, and I see gender, but I don't notice how much I say ageist stuff just about little kids or people that are older than me, and it does seem like almost like their own different group of people when we're really just all the same. This is also why I'm like, I'm on this big skid of like, I'm against capitalism, but this is as to why I'm against capitalism. We're manipulating now. Capitalism has me lying to my grandma, telling her going to the home.
Okay. Exactly. I'm going to tell you, when in 1965, my mom had her parents in a small apartment because grandpa took care of grandma and then he got too sick to do it. And she was working, so she kept trying to do it and she couldn't do it anymore. So she had to put them in a place. In this small town in Iowa where I grew up, the only place she could find was this horrible, horrible, horrible place. Okay. And that's about all there was anywhere. And there was no home health aides. So she couldn't get anybody to come in and help. Okay, fine. So when capitalism is working, it solves problems for people. Great. Wonderful. Hooray. But here's what happens. They see, oh, we can solve this problem for people. Oh, and it's very profitable. Let's make some more. Okay. That was okay at first. But what continued to happen was they started building more and more. So then what they had to start doing was to put up propaganda to fill those places so that they could make all this money. And so now, just like you pointed out, and I'm so happy that you did, is that it's reversed. It used to be a benefit and it used to be a nice thing that capitalism was doing, but then it got greedy. It wanted to keep making more and more money. So now they're building too many of them. And now they've got to convince everybody to go live there. And so now that tends to be the cycle. It starts to help at first and then it stops helping. So, I'm not totally against capitalism, but
No, go ahead, please. Sorry.
I'm not totally against capitalism, but I think it needs to be controlled. Let's put it that way. Unfettered capitalism has made a lot of problems for us all.
Margo, I have a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have a question for you. As a psychoanalyst, is there a difference if you're treating a person as far as them having a different race, a different ethnicity, a different age, whatever? Does that affect the value that you can give to the patient due to the fact that there's cultural differences?
That is a wonderful question, and I could take a week to answer it because, again, in 40 years, I've seen a lot and I've done a lot, right? One of the problems has always been, and let's just take black and white, but it also is true with Hispanics, but most therapists tend to be white. And I don't know, when I was in graduate school, we had like one black guy in my class, and, so it ends up being that it's often, when people of color go into therapy, they often end up being seen by a white person. And, yes, you do need to have some training, but of course we can never know it totally. One of the saving graces, I once, when I was first working as a therapist, I got a job with this guy. He and his friend, his woman friend, had started, this was in the early 80s, had started a therapy practice for gay people, and back then, most therapists thought being gay was a disease. So anyway, so I'm interviewing. His partner left, so he needed a woman. So I'm interviewing, and I said to him, I said, well, do you think it's going to be a problem that I'm straight? And he's like, no, I think it's actually going to be better because you're not going to assume that you know everything about this person. And also in the 80s, I don't think it's as true today, but in the 80s, when coming out was still a very big deal, a lot of gay people would be threatened by somebody who was afraid to come out or whatever. And he says, and you're not going to be bothered by that. So here's how I kind of apply that with people of color when I see them. And right now I have 2 or 3 cases like that. But number one, I know that I'm not assuming that I know what their story is because I really need to listen to them tell me their experience. And I think that can be a benefit. Now, what can be a problem is sometimes, I get a little concerned. Like many years ago, I was working with adolescents and I was working with this one African-American girl. And she had a lot of problems, and so a lot of what was going on between us wasn't necessarily racial, but it certainly was some of it. Anyway, I took her to a flea market, and we're looking and stuff, and I've come upon this table where they're selling this old memorabilia, and it has all this Aunt Jemima stuff. Now, my quandary at that time was, if I don't say anything at all, will she think I think that this is great stuff? If I do say something, and given where she came from, she might not even have known the history of that. I didn't know that because we'd never talked about it. But if I don't say something, will she think I'm on board with it? If I do say something and it doesn't interest her, am I pushing myself onto her? And that's one example, but that's something I always have to be careful of. On the one hand, I want to learn as much about the individual's experience as possible, which is always true in therapy anyway. But I also want to let them know, like, for instance, with some of the people I have now, every once in a while I'll say something like this. One woman, she and her husband started a church, and he's a minister, and they were having various troubles. And every once in a while I might pop in. I'd say, well, that also, what that experience you just had, how did, was that also racist? I say it so that she's aware that I'm aware that it exists. I'm certainly not one of those people that says I'm colorblind, because we all know that's stupid. But I also don't force it on her to say, oh, let's talk about the racial thing. I had a black therapist, actually, when I was younger, when I was in graduate school. And at one point she brought up, she was a good therapist. We did well. But she brought up something about, and it was something racial, and she was right to bring it up. But I'm saying, well, that doesn't bother me. And at the time, the term white privilege was not being used, because, as it is today. But basically, she's like, are you sure? And I'm like, I'm white. I don't have to think about this on a daily basis. I appreciate that you do. But it's those kinds of things that, again, you say something so that it's out there. But when I'm working with a person of color, and it's usually an African-American person as opposed to Hispanic, but I put it out there when I think it's appropriate, but I don't push it, because then it's their right to decide if they want me to work with them on it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Okay. Thank you. I talk a lot, so sometimes I think I'm just going down a rabbit hole. So I always have to check in.
I thought psychoanalysts just listen. They don't really talk.
Well, I do psychoanalytic therapy, but I'm not a psychoanalyst. In 40 years, I've done a lot of different things. I have psychoanalytic training, and mostly not Freudian, but mostly, there's many other kinds, including Jungian. Sometimes I just sit and listen, and sometimes that people just need to talk, but sometimes I'm interactive. I really, I have a lot of different tools, and there's an expression, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So I have a lot of different tools, so I really want to get to know the person and use the tools that are correct for them. And tools that are correct for them one day might not be the best tools for them another day. So, I like to move around. So sometimes I'm quiet and sometimes I'm not.
I'm so here for it. I love that answer. Having a nice humble flex, because it's great. Because it's so nice to have a bunch to know when to talk and when to listen, and and also it basically that's the same thing with this whole I guess the note I could talk about is it's like white guilt is real, but so is every other guilt. So it's like, again, the stuff that you were saying kind of reminded me of like. Again, I'm being more awoken of like being my privilege as a man and stuff that I have, and a lot of my masculinity issues, and are just things that are going on, just stuff like that, and just trying to tiptoe in conversation, going, do I say it? Or do I not say it? And I'm like, it sounded a lot like what you were saying with how you would go about.
Well, and it's listening to the person, and I think that's what you're saying that you do, is you don't just assume you know what to do. You listen to the person you're talking to. I actually have two. I'm sorry?
I said, no, I put my foot in my mouth all the time.
Well, okay. Well, but you know what? If you're calling it that, you're working, and that's what I try and do too. I have two scripts that I have in my head, and I have to write them down, of videos that I want to do about explaining to white people what white privilege is. And I worry a little bit about talking about guilt because, I mean, I know I have white privilege. I don't feel guilty about it because there's nothing I can do about it except to know that I have it, and to therefore, I was telling someone, my daughters and my grandchildren still live up in New Jersey. So I was driving up there one Thanksgiving, and just before I left, I couldn't find my cell phone. Turned out it was under the seat of my car. But anyway, so I'm going up to New Jersey without a phone. So I did not have a GPS. Okay. And, wow. It was weird because, this was a time in life where I almost thought, is it even legal to travel on I-95 without a cell phone? I mean, that thought was going through my head. But what I did, because I certainly didn't want to get lost, so every once in a while I would stop and I would ask somebody, because I wanted to make sure it was going the right direction. And I remember this one woman at a gas station just a little bit outside of Washington, and she said, well, follow me. And without a phone, you young kids probably don't remember this, but Grandpa does. When somebody would have to follow you and how hard that was because you'd have to keep an eye on each other. It was horrible. But she volunteered to do that for me. And then she's pulling off into Washington. She's telling me to go the other direction. But every time I stopped, the only people there for me to talk to ask the question were African-American people. Sometimes it'd be a group. Sometimes like that woman was African-American. She had her grandmother with her. When I was in New Jersey, just before I was at my daughter's house, I stopped and asked this man. He actually drove me to my daughter's house. They were all so nice. And I started thinking, I said, you know what, if I were an African-American person in the same position and everybody I had to stop and ask were white, would I have felt as comfortable as I felt doing it? Okay. So I'm telling this woman who does my hair, and she was a strong woman. Cary, North Carolina is, well, let me put it to you this way. It's a city with a stick up its ass. Okay. I mean, very, very white, very, with a stick up its ass. I'm just telling you. Anyway, so she had a business. She's an African-American woman who had a business in Cary, North Carolina, and she would go to local business people's meetings, and she'd be the only Black person there. And she would tell me stories about how she stood up to them all. So I'm telling her this story about the trip up to New Jersey. And I'm starting to say to her, just like I said to you, I was wondering if I were Black and everybody was white, and I started to say what I feel is comfortable. And she said, before I could say it, she said, scared. And I'm like, whoa, if she would be scared. And to me, I mean, that's what white privilege is. I mean, I don't have to feel guilty about it, but I sure as heck need to recognize it, and not pretend like it doesn't.
And no, you're right. And let me try to change a little bit of the guilt. I guess when I go from guilt, because I also been thinking a lot about shame and the difference between the two. And I think that guilt is something that, or at least what I've been learning, is guilt is something that that is something that you want to work at and you want to address, and shame is something you hide and you keep away from yourself, or you protect with defensiveness or whatever. These different things. And
you are exactly correct on that. Another way though to say it, but you are correct. I mean, you could say that and always be correct. Another way to say it is that guilt is about something you've done. Shame is about something you are. So if you've done something, guilt, you can correct it. And that's what you're talking about, right? You're talking about it. God, if I said the wrong thing or if I was insensitive, I should correct that. Shame is about something that you are. You're usually wrong about it, by the way, because it's something that you've internalized, right? And so therefore, but anyway, but your definitions, the way you used it, were also very correct.
Oh, no, that's good. I like it. Cool.
So I guess we could market a T-shirt that says "I'm guilty."
Well, we could. We could. I don't think I'd wear it. I would rather say I'm woke. And again, to get back, Martin, to what you were talking about earlier, about Biden, and I had said I think it's just a political ploy. So is woke. It's like, woke means that you're not asleep, that you're noticing things around you, but they've turned that into something that should be shameful. And I'm not going to be ashamed of it. So there.
Margo, have you ever worked with anyone who's what is known as an empath?
An empath? Not a lot. I've worked with a couple people who called themselves that, and I didn't really correct it. And basically, I'm not sure what they meant by it. I think this one man that I was working with, and he was in his 70s, and his problem was certainly when I was working with him, he was with a woman who he shouldn't have been with, and he was trying to get away from her. And he called himself an empath. He used that term. I don't use the term, but he really meant that, he feels for people, which is fine. I think a lot of times when people hear empath, it's sort of like something on Star Trek where it's like, you can read minds and things.
You mean he has empathy with people?
Exactly. And most people do.
No, that's not what empath is. That's not.
Yeah, no, yeah, so no. So people tend to use it for that. And I don't argue with them because that's not what I'm there for. But no, not that kind of thing. Have you, by the way, Barton?
Well, I am an empath.
Oh, well, tell us about it. Tell us about it.
Well, basically,
Grandpa Bart, can you turn up your gain a little bit?
I wish you would. Thank you.
It's a sensitivity. It's
Grandfather.
just like any other sense.
Sir.
Can you empathize with our inability to hear you right now?
It doesn't necessarily
See if you can-
mean that you empathize with somebody. It just means that you feel.
We can't hear you, Grandpa. You got to turn up your gain.
You feel their emotion. That's all. You can feel.
Well, you need that microphone right next to your mouth.
It's
Put
just
that
as
mic
There
in
you
your
go.
mouth.
touch.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's just as strong a sense as touch. Apparently,
Okay.
whatever filters people have, that we give off brain waves, and you probably have filters, so you're not generally aware of other people's brain waves. Apparently, I've lost those filters, so I can feel, even from an animal or a bug, I can feel their brain waves.
Well, I have friends who do that. I have friends who who they sense auras and things like that. I mean, I do have friends like that, so I know it exists. It's just, people don't come to me to work on it because in general, it's not a problem. It reminds me of a story, though. This guy that I had, his daughter wanted him to come to therapy because she thought he was too emotional. He was in his 80s. Now, here's the story. This guy was a young boy in the 40s when in Denmark, when the Nazis came in with their tanks and took everybody's food and everything away. And he would tell me this story about what it was like as a little boy, not having enough to eat. And sometimes somebody'd go out on a bicycle because they heard there was food somewhere, but you had to be careful because if the Nazis caught you, they'd take your food and your bicycle. But he was talking about it kind of like I'm talking now and like you're talking now. Then he got all choked up. He got very choked up. And he's telling me, and he says, and then we started to see, the cattle cars would go on the railroad and we could look and we could see through the slats on the cattle cars, they would see people's fingers and they would hear people's voices from inside the cattle. And when he was saying that, he was all choked up. And then he got better again. And then he started talking about something he'd heard on the news. It was one of those sweet stories about some nice thing that somebody had done, and he got choked up again. But his daughter, instead of just seeing that how empathic he was still being, I mean, even 80 years later, somebody who remembers that doesn't get choked up, to me, is there's a problem there. But to his daughter just was upset because he was getting emotional about it. And I think people like yourself, Barton, sometimes people hide that because other people think they're weird, or if they get choked up about something, people think they're weird. And that increases as you get older. Because I'm guessing this woman, his daughter, heard these stories her whole life. But now that Dad was 80, he shouldn't be choking up anymore about these cattle cars with people inside. And, my thought was that's a very healthy thing to do. And it's not the same as being an empath, but he was certainly still being empathic. But even as a little boy, maybe he was an empath because he knew because little boys don't necessarily know what's going on, but he knew what was going on inside those railroad cars.
Well, I get choked up when I see a tractor trailer carrying cattle that I know are going to a slaughterhouse. So
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a sensitivity. That's something different from what I'm
Well,
talking about
yeah,
being able to pick up
but
brain waves.
well, it's on a different spectrum. But you're feeling for other beings, other living beings. Are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not, and I always feel guilty about that.
Okay.
'Cause I'm kind of a hypocrite.
Well, around here we have a lot of farms. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have a lot of farms where cows run free for 2 years and then they take them and slaughter them. And my feeling about that is, I mean, I eat meat, but I will never eat veal because I see no need to torture an animal for us to eat it. There's enough else we can eat. But these animals that are raised on these farms, if it weren't for us eating them, they wouldn't have had those 2 years to run around in the pastures. So, I mean, and I might be rationalizing that, but I think that makes sense.
You can absolve yourself of guilt.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
It does. Grandpa, tell her about how the sort of negative effects of your ability to feel vibes and stuff.
Yeah.
Most of the what I pick up is not necessarily what someone's thinking, but it's more about what they're feeling. And most of the time, the emotion that I get, because this is what society is stress. So it's and I feel that stress. It's very, very powerful. It causes issues with sleeping, and it causes issues while you're awake. It's basically very stressful vibes that I pick up from society.
Well, and then
Occasionally I
that
pick
makes
up
you
very
stressed.
lovely vibes. Pardon?
Yeah. I was said, and then that makes you stressed. A friend of mine years ago was talking about she had a daughter who was very much like you are, and the daughter was like 16 or 17, but they were in a clothing store, and this man walked in, and my friend could kind of sense there was something weird about him, but her daughter suddenly got very sick because this guy was he had so much negativity that he just kind of almost sucked the life out of her daughter, who was in fact very empathic. So yeah, and it can happen.
It's just as strong a sense as all my other five senses.
Yes.
It's just as,
yes.
it's just as strong.
Yeah.
And I've been in situations where, and I don't want to get the reason for it, but the other individual that I was with was so fearful that it almost knocked me down on the floor. That because I could feel that.
Yes.
the vibes were so
Yes.
strong.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's not about.
And that must be, and that's awful. I'm hoping in your life, though, that it has kept you from becoming involved with people that you shouldn't be involved with.
Well, you don't always have a choice, or if you do, maybe you don't want to make. There's compromises in life, as I'm sure you understand.
Well, yes, but at least you have a sense about people. At least you're not as.
Are you talking about someone I know, Grandpa?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Hey, Margo, I wanted to ask you, this is sort of a question for Grandpa versus Sierra and Phines, but sort of like therapy for people in our generation versus therapy for older people. I've never met a therapist who specializes in like people in their 70s and 80s and stuff like that, and how that came about, and also, yeah, just that experience, the difference.
Well, I will tell you, and people assume that it's different. I work on the same things with older people that I work on with younger people. The difference is that I do have two people who come in who have spouses who have Alzheimer's, and that does not happen with younger people. But I have a woman who's 84 years old, and she is working on. She had a great life, by the way. She traveled the country in dancing contests, and she just was a very active person. She's been sober in AA for 35 years. Good life. However, 2 years ago, she realized that, when she was a kid, her father used to, every Saturday morning, her father used to sexually molest her. And that before she died, she wanted to resolve that. And that's the kind of thing that people your age come in for also. People think that it's going to be different, but it's not. I mean, it can be, obviously, but there's a lot of there's more similarity than there is not. I mean, people that come in older, like the other lady I told you about, do worry about every time they forget something, they think they're getting senile when they're not. But, and they're dealing with ageism. They're dealing with their own ageism. They're dealing with their own thoughts of how being old means they're worthless anymore. I do find that people who live out in the community are more likely to be open than people who live in, these huge places with, 500 other old people. There's something about those senior communities, as they're called, where there's just this assumption that if everybody's in their 70s, they must all like each other and be friends. And that's no more true in the 70s than it was when we were in our 30s and 20s, because people are all different. So
Phines worked in the medical field, and we had someone on. We had a really crazy discussion about those living facilities, like this person who had worked in them and wrote stuff about sort of the horrors and the it's a rough business. It's a crazy business.
It's a rough business. I've had people,
a lot of abuse.
I've had people in my office who've gone into, I had one man go into a CCRC, it's Continuing Care Residential Community Center, and you have to give them anywhere from $300,000 to $900,000 just to get in the door. And that's their money. But they promise you that they'll put you, you start when you're perfectly healthy, and they'll take care of you no matter what happens. They'll move you up the road. But they make a lot of promises that they don't keep. For instance, this one guy, he moved in because his wife was ill and he wanted her to have good care. And and she died, but she didn't die because of bad care, but he was so upset by the care she got. He walked away from $500,000. He just left it there. I'm glad to bring it up, by the way. I have a course that, I teach people, number one, how to decide what they want, what's best for them. But if they do want to go into a CCRC or a senior housing, how to decide what's the best one, but also how to talk to salespeople, what questions to ask, get everything in writing. Because if this guy had gotten it in writing, he might have been able to take some of his money away.
Would you want to go to one, Grandpa?
No.
Good.
No.
I'm so glad to hear that.
I think when you get my age, at least for me, I think about death, because I have close friends of mine died 17 years ago, and all you ever hear about is people dying.
Yeah.
My age. So.
Yeah. Well, it's that, and it's just sort of like you're just isolated from the world. One of the things I don't like about them is that sometimes people come in to entertain, and even they'll have high school kids, a choir come in and sing, but they don't have them doing anything for anybody. It's suddenly you're just there passively, and you have no real use or function in life anymore, and that's not good for anybody. But one of the things I heard the other day, I was on LinkedIn, and sometimes one of these live things will pop up, and it was these two very charming young women. One was selling a marketing program, teaching people how to use email for marketing, and the other one was someone who was a marketer for one of these communities, right? And the woman is teaching, says, you want to make sure that when they come for the tour that they don't bring anybody, because what if they bring their sister and their sister asks questions? I'm like, yeah, good. Ask questions, ask more questions. But they were really teaching them to be careful of not letting them ask questions.
It's like a used car salesman.
They basically are used. Thank you. They basically are used car salesmen. Yeah. Only at least a used car salesman is giving you a car, which. But there's a lot of underhanded marketing that they don't even think, because one of the reasons they were doing that openly on LinkedIn is because they don't see it as underhanded marketing. It's just smart marketing. And one of the things I do in my course, which yes, I'm selling, so I'm putting in a little plug for myself here, but is to teach people, know yourself well enough to know where you want to go, and don't let anybody fool you, and make sure you get everything in writing. But the marketers don't want you to do anything. They don't want you to ask questions at all. So,
can you bullet point your sort of the projects or the names of all of the sort of different stuff that you do?
Oh,
Or just,
okay.
like,
Well,
lift one
I have my YouTube channel, which is Age Out Loud. I need to work some more on that. But the thing I'm proudest of there is the playlist that has the 12 videos that say, if you have dementia symptoms, this is what else it could be. For example, UTIs, babies get UTIs. Some people get them their whole lives, some people never do, but it's something that people can have at any stage of life. When you get to be our age, Barton and my age, a UTI can have symptoms that make it look like dementia. So if you go to the doctor and you're 45, you have these symptoms, the doctor says, oh, well, you have a UTI. We better fix that before it gets worse. If you're Barton's age or my age and we have those symptoms, oh, you have dementia. And number one, you're treated for something you don't have. And the UTI that you do have doesn't get treated because they think it's dementia. But anyway, so
what is UTI? What is UTI?
Urinary tract infection. Thank you for asking. Anyway, so I have my YouTube channel, which is Age Out Loud. I have my therapy practice. I have a consulting practice, which I do, for people all over the country. And that is a lot about having generations work together. And it's mainly with older people and their immediate children. When they're having troubles because the children begin to think, and often because people tell them that they should start to control their parents' lives. So I do a consulting practice about that. I have my course, which is...
What do you think about that one, Grandpa?
Well, I know in my situation, my mother did have dementia. It was very obvious. And I tried to put her into a care facility, very nice one, beautiful restaurants and everything. And after dinner, she was fine. We had dinner with some of the personnel. He took her up to her room, and she complained to the point where they said, you better take her home, or she's going to end up in the ER. She wanted to stay in her home. And I accepted that, and she did live out her life in her home. So I guess when you ask me what I think about it, that's what I think about it. That's the way I behave.
There is a lovely man that I know, Dr. DeLon Canterbury, and he has a PhD in pharmacy, as a matter of fact, and he runs a program called Deprescribing. He started doing this because his grandmother, they kept her at home and she had dementia symptoms, and everybody said she had dementia. And then they couldn't control her because she got, too hard to handle. So they put her in a nursing home, and soon the nursing home called up and said, come and get her. We can't handle her either. Kind of like what happened with you. Anyway, he looked at all her medications and he got her off her medications. And I mean, she's not that he took her off all of them, but, they were interacting with each other. And he got her off most of her medications. And the next thing you know, she didn't have dementia symptoms at all. And my story is my mother had dementia symptoms. I mean, she was pretty bad. And my dad was taking care of her. She also had a lot of internal bleeding. And they gave her surgery because she had 2 of her organs were bleeding. That they could fix. But she had a lot of little bleeding from all over the place. They couldn't control it. So every once in a while, and she had dementia symptoms very badly. And everybody would have said, oh, she has dementia. And every once in a while, she'd lose so much blood, they'd have to take her to the hospital for a transfusion. And they'd bring her home, because they were living with me. They'd bring her home, and she was almost as good as new. So, I hate to say this to you, Barton, but maybe your grandma or your mother had dementia, and maybe she didn't. Because at that point, and that's kind of my whole thesis here, is that you need, when you're a certain age, they just assume that these symptoms are something wrong with your brain. And often it's not. And in the old days, they always just say it's dementia, deal with it, lock them up, do whatever. And today people are getting better about saying, you know what, let's look and see if maybe it's something else. I mean, I know my mother, if they had treated my mother for what she really had, she would have been much better off and she wouldn't have had dementia. So, I mean, I certainly suffered through what you suffered through with your mother. But there's a lot of that's like I started out with. Dementia is one of the most misdiagnosed things. It's overdiagnosed because too many people get that diagnosis that don't have it.
In a way, I kind of feel sorry for younger people that they're exposed to so much pressure from television and YouTube and everything for every disease and everything. Everybody's trying to sell something, and it's like, I think the most important thing is to be able to filter out a lot of this stuff that's going on today.
And it's harder to do it now than it was when we were kids, most definitely.
A young child growing up, he's 6 years old, and he's got to hear about dysfunction and all this kind of stuff. Why do you have to deal with that when you're a child? You know, it's.
I kind of worry about, when we were kids, we never had play groups. What's a play group? We just went out and played, right? But now they have to schedule everything for these poor kids.
There must be a way somebody's making money out of it. I don't know.
Probably.
How do Phines and Sierra, how do you guys deal with it?
How do I deal with constantly being reminded of different ways I'm gonna pass away? There's a it's all right. It's cool.
We're not laughing at you.
No, it's good. I was trying to be funny. It was good. It's good.
Okay. Laughing with you, not at you.
Okay, it's good. Thank you. I appreciate it. No. I like what you're saying, Grandpa, because you're right. Every single second, every I'm a self-improvement type of person, and the algorithm knows. And so I go on YouTube, I go anywhere, and there is always something that I can improve on with. It just adds to anxiety. This isn't cool. I didn't have to know this. I didn't know I didn't have to. I didn't need another mirror to show me a different spot that I didn't need to see. But at the same time, who knows? I feel like I feel growth. I feel like I think I've been like nerding out over here thinking about how messed up the ageism thing is. Like, they're segregating y'all. They're putting y'all little houses over there, just trying to keep you away from us. It's just so funny. I'm just like just nerding out over like how bad it is. It's just as bad as I don't know if it's just as bad as racism, but you know what? I don't know. I bet there's a lot of like, if someone just drugging people up, just all this stuff sounds. If it was a different age, if you were like you were saying, if this was someone else's, if I was a 30-year-old person, and they were giving me all these drugs all the time and doing all this, and I was acting up, I don't know. They might shoot me too. Who knows? I don't know.
There's much less chance that they would have given you all those drugs.
Yes.
That,
exactly.
Again.
That is so.
Yeah. Although being black, there's more of a chance for you than there is for Brandon. That they misdiagnose you than there is Brandon. You all know who Serena Williams is, of course. Right? Serena Williams?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's black, obviously. She, in her own right, she's a multimillionaire. She's married to a white guy who's a billionaire. So, okay, when she went to the hospital to have her baby, when she was in labor, there was something wrong going on. And she tried to tell the doctors that, and they wouldn't pay any attention to her. They pay less attention to women than they do men, and they pay less attention to black people than they do to white people. And there she was. With all of her privilege that she does have, it wasn't doing her any good at that moment. So you might actually, you have more of a chance of being over-medicated than not to say that it would never happen to Brandon, but you have more of a chance than Brandon does. Yeah. But also when you're older, they tend to do it more to older people in general than they do to younger people. Because again, they're just like, well, it must be dementia. Just give them medication.
What if you're an old black woman? They probably drug them people up.
It's even worse.
I need to go call my mom as soon as I get out of this and tell her to watch out.
Let me tell you, and if you want to contact me, or have your mom contact me. I mean, and there's this guy, Dr. Canterbury, who I love dearly. He's African American, by the way, but he's in Durham, close to me. But there's starting to be pharmacists all over the country who are doing this de-prescribing, and what they will do is look at somebody's medications and tell them how they're interacting with each other, because your doctor won't tell you that. The doctors don't tell you that, but these pharmacists, these specific pharmacists, the ones that work at Walmart won't tell you that, but these specific pharmacists will do it. So if your mom wants to know, have her contact me and I'll hook her up with somebody. Okay.
All right.
Well, thankfully, things are getting better.
Excuse me?
I said, thankfully, things in that respect are getting better.
Well, there are, because there are people who are starting to pay attention to it. And of course, the pharmaceutical industry, they're making a lot of money off all this medication. So they're not liking it so much. But yes, you're right, Barton, it is getting better because there are people like my friend, Dr. Canterbury. Yeah.
But there.
Yeah. Oh, no, you go, Phines.
Just more, all the random thoughts. This is random flat stuff. Because I was learning about, what is it, cognitive dissonance. And this has been ringing pretty hard on a lot of stuff we are talking about right now because of trying to put my parents or people older into a house, even though they're okay. But then it's like, I don't know. I'm still learning about what cognitive dissonance is. So I'm trying to, but there's a little bit of what you're saying that I'm like, I think I read something that recently about like trying to make sense of something that is not sensical. Like the whole, that's what you were saying about the knees. You're like, oh, one knee hurts and the other one doesn't hurt. Well, I don't think people are always thinking about that. Is that kind of close to cognitive dissonance? Is that something? Or they're like almost getting old?
It's also having two thoughts that contradict each other. And I'm gonna say this one, and I don't know how it's people who say they are pro-life, right? And you know what that means. It usually means that they're against abortion, which is fine, and that's not why I'm bringing it up. But that they say they're pro-life, yet at the same time they're against anybody that can't pay for it having medical care. So that's cognitive dissonance, because how can you be pro-life when you're willing to let all these people die because they don't have medical care? Do you see? But yet they insist they're pro-life,
and
then they also insist.
So what's the so when they have an explanation for it, that's the cognitive dissonance, right? So when they justify it and they go, oh, it's because of this, right?
Yeah, people who have cognitive dissonance often don't realize it. Like these people who say they're pro-life believe it, even though they're also trying to pass laws to get medical care taken away from people who don't have enough money. And they will fight to the death to say, well, that's got nothing to do with this, when in fact, how can you be pro-life if you think that people should be denied medical care because of money?
You hit the nail on the head.
They'll defend it. Then they get headaches because then they have to build up all these reasons why what they're saying makes sense and isn't contradictory. And that's cognitive. Having to convince people of something that is contradictory, having to convince people that it's not contradictory, that's cognitive dissonance.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. That's all I had to say, Brandon. That took everything off, off the rails.
Now I know you're a liberal, Margo.
Oh, well, I proudly, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And I grew up in a town and with parents who were, as we call it, yellow dog Republicans, Goldwater conservatives, and I know they were all good people. They're not like the conservatives of today at all. My father would be, oh God, it would be like ripping his heart out if he saw what was going on in the Republican Party today. But because I know that people like that, have been decent, it's not happening today so much. So that's just my thought.
Not fair-minded people at all.
No,
not at all.
No. And again, I mean, it's even like, they insist that a woman not have an abortion, but they don't think she should have medical care either. So if the baby dies because for lack of medical care before it's born, that's okay. Cognitive dissonance. And again, they believe it on some level, unconsciously, they have to know that is wrong, but they also consciously have to believe it and defend it.
Since when do people act rationally?
Well, some people do. Some people do. Although you can be too rational, and that's not good. There's a TV show it's an old TV show, but I like to watch reruns, called Bones. And there was one of the interns was this very rational guy. And he was so rational that when he met someone who gave him this argument that you need to kill people in order to save the world, it made rational sense to him. So you can be too rational too. Anyway,
But isn't that
I don't know why I brought
irrational?
that up, but
Isn't that irrational?
well, if you think you're really rational, anything you can make anything sound rational. That was kind of the point of that story, and he had no way of thinking outside of rationality, so he had to. If something was being told to him by somebody he respected, he had to make it rational.
Margo,
The human mind is very complex and confusing. Let's just put it that way. How's that?
do you have a family that?
I have a daughter and a son-in-law who's the best son-in-law in the universe, and two gorgeous grandchildren, Nico and Catalina, who live up in New Jersey.
Nice.
Yeah.
How old are your grandchildren?
Well, Nico will be 17 in June, and Catalina will be 13 in September. So they're at that age, and they're gorgeous and all sorts of wonderful good things. I have a
I saw. Oh no, go.
no.
please.
You go ahead.
Well, no, it was just on your page. You had all these really interesting things about, and I wondered if it came from your grandchildren that inspired it. But like, what responsibilities do the generations have to each other, and ageism affecting young people, and mixing the generate? I mean, it's so like specific to our podcast. It's almost like weird, that.
Yeah, I just had this thought. I read somewhere where there are, I don't know, something like, 27 billion or trillion, I don't even remember the number, different kinds of good bacteria that human beings can carry around. Obviously, we all have billions of them on our own bodies, but none of us can have all of them, right? And one of the good things about touching each other, even just shaking hands, is that's a way that we transfer bacteria, good bacteria. We don't just transfer bad germs to each other. We transfer good bacteria back and forth to each other, and that's what keeps us all healthier. We need bacteria from other people, and I think it's the same thing with the generations. I mean, I know things that younger people don't know, and they can learn from me. I've learned things from younger people, but when we get ourselves in these, like, we can only deal with our own generation, and every other generation is a enemy, and we all live separately from each other. We can't interpollinate, I guess, for lack of a better word. I remember when I went to the University of Iowa when I was 18, and we came home at Thanksgiving. And it was so weird and I didn't think this was especially good. It was like, it's been 2 months since I've seen anybody that wasn't, that was older than 25. And I realized that even at 18, I didn't especially like that. I mean, I didn't think it was all that great. I mean, it would have been nice to have it more mixed. So even at 18, I knew better than to have us all be separated.
I feel that, at least in the sense that I didn't go to college, but whenever I did go to universities with my friends to see that, I just felt like it was so unreal. Like, this feels like, who's the tiny mayor here? Because this is like so many little kids. Like,
it's unreal when you're 18 and in college, and it's unreal when you're 70 and in a senior housing. It's unreal. Yeah. It's unreal, and it doesn't help anybody. I don't think it helps anybody, not at all. I don't know if I answered your question, Brandon, but
Well, I guess just is it when you had grandkids that you really started to think about this, or because it's a very interesting thing. Grandpa always used to say to me, he's like, I hated being around old people.
Well, I will tell you, when I was a kid, my mother had siblings, and I had cousins, but of all of her siblings, she was the only one that made her children sit, and we would go visit grandma, and grandma had a stroke, and she had dementia symptoms because of the stroke. They always said it was because grandpa spoiled her too much, but that's another issue. But mom used to make us sit and listen to grandma talk about the days back in era. My grandmother was born in Canada, but she grew up when she was a little kid in Los Angeles, and she used to talk about how she could walk from one end of Los Angeles to the other all by herself. Listen, imagine that. But sometimes I didn't like listening to the stories, mainly because, after a while you'd heard them before. But I also didn't hate it. And I wasn't very old before I started thinking, oh my God, these are useful stories. These are things that I can use in my life. So I was probably pretty young. And I appreciate that my mother did that. Her siblings did not make their children do that, but my mom and dad did. I'm certainly glad for it now. But I think I even liked it then. Sometimes I complained about it, you know how kids are. But I think even back then, I kind of liked it. The first time I worked with older people, I was like in my late 20s. And it was this big building. They don't even have that kind of facility anymore. But I remember it was a 3-story building, and most of the people were ambulatory, and they were pretty high. They were pretty functioning. And there was this rule that they couldn't, if they went in anywhere in an elevator, one of the staff had to push the buttons for them because they weren't. I mean, it was a 3-story building. They weren't allowed to push buttons. So I'd get on the elevator, and somebody'd say, "Well, would you push floor 3 for me?" And I would say, "Well, why should I do it? You can do it." And I'd say, "Well, we're not supposed to." And I'd say, "Do it, do it." And sometimes we would take them into town, and oh God, the owner who was like there was this guy. This was in Western New Jersey, and he was a very wealthy contractor. And he had 3 daughters, and every time one would graduate from high school, he'd build a big facility for 500 people that one of those girls could run. Speaking of wonders of capitalism. But anyway, I remember they were trying to insist that when we took people to town that we would wear blazers with it, Andover Intermediate Care Center on it. And we were arguing, we're saying, we don't want to do that. And the reason we don't want to do that is because these people don't want to be looked at as residents of the care center when they're in town. They hardly ever get there. They want to be seen as a regular person. And she actually said, this 20-year-old something, actually said, you are worried entirely too much about the welfare of these people and not enough about the image of this facility.
Oh my God.
She said it. She said it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, needless to say, I didn't last there very long. And I did get fired, which I used to be proud of until I realized that it was just because they didn't want to pay me. I mean, I was getting like $7,000 a year, but they didn't want to pay me anymore. At first, I thought it was because I'd done something cool, but it was more just because they didn't want to part with $7,000 a year. So I did get fired from that place. But even then, I kind of was like, no, this isn't the way it should be at all. So I guess I've always been a little more woke on the subject. And now, certainly that I'm 75, I don't want to be treated. I want people to know that I'm an old woman because I am. I don't want to be treated how they think old people should be treated. How's that?
Same for you too, Grandpa, right?
Yeah, and
I
Grandpa
tell people
too.
that I got myself a young woman. And she's only 76.
Well, you do. I mean, well, she's older than I am, but not much. But yeah, it's, we're not treated for who we are. We're treated for how old we are. And that does nobody any good. And there's also, ageism is one of these isms that, white people who are racist against black people and brown people are never going to be black or brown. But young people who are ageist against old people, you're doing that to yourself because one of these days, this system that you're building up where old people and thank you for asking, Barton, such as Joe Biden, I mean, someday you're going to be Joe Biden's age. Are you going to want people to think you can't do anything? So it's actually a form of an ism that you perpetrate against your future self. Because hopefully we'll all get there. Nobody wants to die young.
Right. You may not be as sharp, but you have more knowledge, you have more experience.
Exactly. And
you have more wisdom, hopefully.
Yes, and it balances out. I mean, yes. I mean, one of the things I say, when I was 45, I had a job at an agency where I saw a lot of people, and I had a private practice at night. So I saw a lot of people. I did not have to keep a date book. And if somebody would call me up and they'd say, I want an appointment with you, I knew when I had an opening. I did not have to keep a date book. Now, not only do I have to keep a date book, I look at it 3-4 times a day. So yes, as Barton says, my memory is not as good as it used to be, but that does not mean that I can't be a great therapist. And it certainly doesn't mean I have dementia.
I'm going to argue that with you even more in a good way, not the bad way. I think that you ask someone, anybody in my age group, in my age, our memory, I couldn't remember. I can't remember dates. I've got everything in my phone. I don't have to use my mind for that. I can use my mind for other things like caring about old people. So it's not So I don't think that maybe it's your brain. Maybe it's just that you don't have to use it as much. You don't have to use that. You don't have to use that. You have other things that it may be that you have technology helping you out more than this. It is you probably have just as good memory as you did before.
Well, I remember a time when I knew, and Barton does too, I'll guarantee you, I knew the telephone number of everybody, that all of my friends and all of my family. I knew if I had to call them, I knew how to punch in their telephone number. I barely know my own telephone number anymore because we don't have to.
Sounds like I get a math
That's
degree
a good
number people's numbers. Yeah. I would have to get like a degree in math to think about remembering more than four
that's a
people's
good
numbers.
point.
I don't know. I'd be out of luck.
With the computer.
It has. And sometimes it's for there's good stuff about it. I mean, we wouldn't know each other or be talking to each other if it weren't for computers. And sometimes it really takes a lot. Sometimes it really sucks because sometimes it just really takes stuff out of us.
I know the 150 Pokemon really, really well. So I guess there's other things I can use instead of using for I don't have to use the phone numbers. There's other things.
Margo, it's very nice meeting you. I have to move on. You guys can continue. I've got to get my birds to bed. I've got 3 birds.
No, we're right at 8:30. Grandpa, give us your last thought, and we'll do our last thought.
A little bit about myself, just by listening to Margo. It's been a very interesting podcast, I would say, and I enjoyed it.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Grandpa. Phines, what's your last thought?
Oh, great talking to you, Margo. I am gonna tell my mom about you, and hopefully we get in touch with that. So, because I think it is still an issue with all the stuff you're saying with ageism and racism still going on. And I definitely think that women of color that are getting older should check it out and learn about this stuff, because it's a thing and it's still prevalent. So.
One of the things Dr. Canterbury says is because of this over medication, besides people are getting dementia symptoms, people are dying. They're killing people because of it, because it does kill people. So, yeah, I would love to talk with your mom.
Thank you.
Sierra.
We've had like a string of dementia related episodes, and it's like interesting, but like real depressing. The stats basically tell us now that, like, I think, what did we say last time? Like either all of us or 1 in 5 of us is like just like basically about to get dementia. It was something crazy. So I appreciate you coming in and alleviating some of the doom and gloom. If anybody binge watches, binge listens to the podcast.
I know we're stopping, but since you brought that up, Sierra, I must say this. First place, I have to say, please. The Alzheimer's Association is a great organization. Alzheimer's is real. It's a horrible thing, and give them money because they need to stop it. However, to get the money, they also sometimes present statistics in ways that make it sound worse than it is. People come in and tell me 12% of everybody's going to have Alzheimer's. Well, first place, that's not that high. It's a lot less than cancer. But what they don't say, because it isn't often told to them, that 12% is only for people in their 90s and above. So even people in their 90s, it's only 12%. People in their 80s and 70s, it's much lower. But what people hear is they hear the 12%, and then they think it's, and like you said, Sierra, and I'm so happy you gave me the opportunity to talk about this in a different way. People in their 70s and 80s, it's really a much lower, and most people in their 90s aren't going to get it either. But it scares us all so much, and then we get scared, we get anxious, and then we're more likely to have dementia symptoms because of the anxiety. I'll stop.
Yes.
But thank you, Sierra.
Yes, thank you. But it's been very nice to have you back. I would love to have you back on the show. I love the ageist talks are very interesting.
Yeah, I would love to come back, by the way. I'm just telling everybody. So feel free.
And I love your puppies.
And you invited us.
Puppies.
You invited us on your YouTube channel, right?
Well, it's not on the YouTube channel. I have 2 things that I do. One, I have my own. And it's just a live. It goes on my LinkedIn and 2 of my Facebook pages. It's live, and then usually people that come on can use it and post it. Or I do it on. Have you ever heard of StreamYard? Love StreamYard. If you're connected to StreamYard, which you can do for free, you can also have it on your LinkedIn page and your Facebook page. So but I do it live, and then I also, the people that are helping me promote my course, we do another live that we do, and you're welcome to come to either one of them, and we'll work it out. See my baby? Isn't she gorgeous? But we'll work it out if you'd like to do it. I'd love to have you. And Grandpa too.
Margo, what's your last thought before we wrap up so Grandpa can get out of here?
I'm just so excited that you have this podcast with a grandfather and a grandson. I mean, I just want to get on rooftops and shout to everybody that this exists. There's a lot of cool podcasts, but this is the one that got me so excited.
Yeah. I want to say that I am always looking for something that like fits in with the theme of the show, because we go all over the place, but this is like the log line, and you're such a lovely and amazing guest and so perfectly fit into the show. Thank you so much for coming on. As always, thank you, Phines, Sierra. Grandpa, I love you. You can leave now. Oh, what does that say? What does that say?
Look up. It says look up.
Age Out Loud at YouTube.
Age Out Loud on
Whoa.
Yes.
Don't forget to like it and comment also, but like the videos and
You know what?
comment.
Oh, yes. All your stuff will be, Sierra is very graciously putting in the show notes, but if shout out your links and stuff real quick.
Yourperfectretirementliving.com is a great place to go. That'll help protect you from all the people that are trying to make you go places you don't want to go. Yourperfectretirement.com. Age Out Loud on YouTube. Age Out Loud on Facebook. And I'm on LinkedIn. People would like, if you want to connect and mention that you heard me here, I'd be happy to connect with you. And I also have, because I wrote a book called You Can Keep Your Parents Home. What's it? You can keep your parents home, keep your job and your life, save your fortune and your sanity, which was about, it's half of it is about, and I intermix it, but 50% of it is about a program that if you want to have your parents come and live with you when they're older, how to do it. And the other 50% is when I did it with my parents, and the joys and the mistakes that we made, which is partly how I got my thing. But anyway, so I have that book, and that's on Amazon, and there'll be more. There'll be more. I can't imagine retiring. I just can't imagine ever doing it. So.
Well, thank you so much again, Margo. It was really awesome having you on. I love all you guys.
I want a picture of Sierra. I want to see Sierra.
You gotta go to the old episodes. You gotta
go
go
on our
back.
YouTube.
Okay.
There you go.
Podcasting with Grandpa Bart and Rosie, always on his shoulder. This is Grandpa and Chill.
Grandpa and Chill is brought to you by your hosts, Brandon Fox, Bart Frank, and Phines Jackson. Our producer is Sierra Doss. To watch and listen to full episodes of the show and follow us on social media, visit grandpaandchill.com. That's grandpaandchill.com.